As a fisherman, you stand on the shore of Haraya Beach and toss your cast net into the surf. It is an auspicious day in the second month of the third year of the Kiowa era. It is warmer than usual for this early in the year. The seas are choppy, though, and dark storm clouds gather on the horizon. Then you see it. A strange object is approaching slowly, being pushed ashore by the tide. At first, you think it's a massive turtle, larger than anything you've ever seen, with a shell the size of your home. Then, as it nears, you recognize it for what it is, a strangely built vessel of some kind. It appears like two saucers joined at the lips, one inverted over the other, with windows in the top. A small crowd gathers, and your trepidation turns to apprehension as a hatchway opens and someone emerges. To your surprise, it is a woman the likes of which you've never seen before. Her hair is red, her skin pale, her clothing is strange, as is the box she is clutching in her arms. Another fisherman turns and runs for the authorities. They need to know what is happening here. You don't want to get mixed up in whatever this strange woman in her even stranger boat is doing here, but curiosity gets the best of you and you approach. Hoping to put the woman at ease, you offer a friendly greeting, asking if she needs help. The woman gives no sign that she understands and replies in a language you've never heard before. She simply stands by her vessel, clutching the box. You glance inside the vessel. Writing as strange as her language can be seen within, as well as provisions and what might be bedding. You also notice no one else is aboard, though it seems large enough to accommodate more than a single person. Before you can say anything else, a larger crowd from the village is racing towards the beach. Before long, the village headman arrives, followed by officials from the local magistrate's office. You backpedal, suddenly finding your forgotten cast net very interesting. As you retreat back to the water's edge, you watch the men gently urge the woman back into the boat. You can't tell if she protests or not. Before you know it, they have set the boat adrift, and the riptide pulls it away. Within minutes, the Utsuro-bune, or hollow boat, shrinks towards the horizon, becoming just a story you tell for the rest of your life. The story of the Utsuro-bune is one of the most fascinating mysteries in Japanese history. It asks more questions than it answers, and for more than 200 years, scholars, historians, and paranormal researchers have debated what actually happened. I'm less interested in where the ship originated, or what was in the box she wouldn't let anyone near, or why she was alone. I want to know where she went after they set her adrift once more. Welcome to Paranormal Possibilities, where we talk about what is possible, what is probable, and what is unlikely. Today we're looking into the Utsuro-bune, a story that has persisted for 2 centuries, with a focus on where the strange woman in her stranger vessel might have gone after the story ends. The story of the Utsuro-bune has fascinated historians, folklorists, and paranormal researchers for more than 2 centuries. Unlike many legends that evolved entirely through oral tradition, this one has the unusual distinction of appearing in multiple written sources. According to the traditional account, the incident occurred in 1803 during Japan's Edo period under the Tokugawa shogunate. Along the coast near Haraya Beach, in what is now Ibaraki Prefecture, local fishermen reportedly noticed an unfamiliar object drifting towards shore. As it approached, they realized it was some sort of vessel, but unlike any boat they had ever encountered. Descriptions vary slightly depending on which account is consulted, but the craft was generally described as circular and measuring somewhere between 10 and 18 feet in diameter. The lower portion was reportedly reinforced with metal plates, perhaps to protect it from rocks or rough seas, while the upper section featured several glass or crystal windows sealed with tree resin. Strange symbols or writing decorated the interior walls, although no one present recognized the language. Inside sat a young woman. She was described as being around 18 or 20 years old, with unusually pale skin and long reddish or reddish-brown hair. Some versions even mention white fibers or powder woven into her hair, though no explanation is given for what they might have been. Her clothing was also unlike anything the villagers had seen before, and when she spoke, her language was completely unfamiliar. One detail appears consistently throughout the various retellings. She carried a small box. According to the story, she refused to let anyone touch it, clutching it tightly whenever someone approached. Naturally, that single detail has inspired countless theories over the years. Was it a family heirloom, religious relic, personal treasure, the remains of a loved one? The reality is much less satisfying. No one knows. The history accounts never describe its contents because, according to the legend, no one ever looked inside. The vessel itself reportedly carried only a few basic supplies: 2 sheets, roughly a gallon of fresh water, some cake, and what is described as kneaded meat. Exactly what that meant in 1803 remains uncertain. It might have referred to preserved fish, ground meat, or some other prepared ration intended for travel. The story itself wasn't written down immediately after the alleged event. The earliest known account appears in Toin Shosetsu, published in 1825, roughly 22 years later. Another version appeared in Ume no Chiri in 1844, and later collections preserved similar tellings. Like many historical narratives, it's impossible to know how faithfully these publications preserved the original account. Details may have been omitted, exaggerated, or added over time. But there's another aspect of the story that often gets overlooked. This wasn't the only tale of its kind. Japanese folklore contains several remarkably similar accounts stretching back into the 17th century. In some versions, the mysterious passenger is described as a Chinese princess, in others, an Indian princess. Still others tell of foreign women arriving alone under mysterious circumstances, each speaking an unfamiliar language, and each arriving from the sea. That's interesting because it forces us to ask a different question. If these were all genuine historical events, who was producing them? Think of it this way. Imagine someone discovers a message in a bottle washing up on the beach. That's unusual, but entirely believable. Now imagine another bottle washes up a few years later, then another, and another. Eventually, historians stop asking whether the bottles existed. Instead, they begin asking who's putting messages in bottles in the first place. The same principle applies here. One mysterious vessel drifting ashore is historically plausible. Oceans have carried castaways for thousands of years. But if similar stories appear repeatedly over centuries, we have to consider two possibilities. The first is that these accounts describe genuine recurring events. If that's true, then somewhere there may have been a culture that repeatedly launched or perhaps repeatedly exiled people in these unusual vessels. The second possibility is that these stories gradually became a recognizable folklore motif. Perhaps one remarkable event inspired later stories. Perhaps older legends influenced how later events were remembered or interpreted. Or perhaps entirely ordinary encounters with foreign castaways became embellished over generations until they adopted familiar narrative elements. At present, there isn't enough evidence to confidently choose between these explanations, and interestingly, for the purpose of this episode, I don't think we have to. Because while almost every documentary about the Utsuro-bune spends its time asking who the woman was, what was inside the box, or whether the vessel was a UFO, these aren't the questions that caught my attention. The traditional account ends with the villagers making a decision. Unable to understand the woman or determine where she had come from, they reportedly returned her to the vessel, pushed it back into the sea, and watched it drift away. And then the story simply ends. Or at least that's where everyone else stops telling the story. For me, that's where the mystery actually begins. So rather than asking the same questions that have been asked for generations, I decided to ask a different one. What happened after she left Japan? At first, I assumed this would be relatively straightforward. Surely someone had attempted to reconstruct where the vessel might have drifted after leaving the beach. Perhaps there were historical records from another country describing the arrival of a mysterious foreign woman. Instead, I discovered that tracing her possible journey is far more complicated than I expected. The first place to begin is with the ocean itself. Japan sits at the intersection of two major current systems that travel in different directions. The Kuroshio Current generally flows northeastward along Japan's Pacific coast before turning east into the open Pacific toward the Aleutian Islands. Flowing in the opposite direction, though, is the Oyashio Current, a cold current that travels southward from the waters near Kamchatka and the Kuril Islands. On a map, that sounds wonderfully simple. In reality, it isn't. Ocean currents aren't highways. They're dynamic systems influenced by tides, seasonal weather patterns, coastal geography, prevailing winds, and countless rotating eddies that can send floating objects in unexpected directions. Two vessels entering the water only a few miles apart or during a different season might follow an entirely different path. There's another complication. Modern ocean current maps represent today's climate. While the Kuroshio and Oyashio currents almost certainly existed in 1803, their exact strength and position might not have been identical to what we observe today. Even if we could perfectly construct where the villagers pushed the vessel back into the water, we still couldn't predict its course with complete confidence. That uncertainty means almost anything is possible within reason. Could the vessel have been carried out into the open Pacific? Perhaps. But there are several destinations that seem considerably more likely. Depending on the winds and currents, she may have reached another stretch of Japan's coastline. She might have drifted, for example, north toward Hokkaido or the Kuril Islands. She could have been carried south toward the Ryukyu Kingdom, now Okinawa. It's also conceivable that she eventually reached Korea, Sakhalin, or another inhabited coastline bordering the Sea of Japan or the Northern Pacific. Every one of these locations raises the same intriguing possibility. What if she actually survived? That question changed the way I approached this entire investigation. Initially, I searched for more stories about mysterious hollow boats. Then it occurred to me, why would anyone else describe the boat? Imagine that she washed ashore somewhere else a week later. The people who found her wouldn't know she had just come from Japan. They wouldn't know the term Utsuro-bune. They wouldn't know they'd just become the second chapter in an already strange story. They would simply record the arrival of an unidentified woman speaking an unfamiliar language. In other words, I'd been looking for the wrong thing, so I changed my approach. Instead of searching for hollow boats, I began to search for reports of unidentified women, foreign castaways, mysterious visitors, isolated historical accounts from roughly the same time period. I searched combinations of terms that might describe the person rather than the vessel, anything that might plausibly describe the continuation of her journey, but I came up empty. That doesn't necessarily mean such an account never existed, it simply means I couldn't find one. In fairness, that's hardly surprising. Historical records from the early 19th century are notoriously incomplete. Many village chronicles were never copied. Temple records were lost to fires, earthquakes, wars, or simple neglect. Some survive only in local archives that have never been translated or digitized. Others disappeared centuries ago. Even if she reached another populated coastline, there's no guarantee anyone considered the event important enough to preserve. And if they did preserve it, there's no guarantee those records still exist. In fact, there's another possibility that's even more interesting. Perhaps she reached land, and nothing remarkable happened at all. Imagine a small coastal village discovering a frightened young woman who couldn't speak the local language. Perhaps someone offered her food. Perhaps they gave her shelter. Perhaps, over time, she learned enough of the language to communicate. Maybe she married. Maybe she raised a family. Maybe she lived an entirely ordinary life after surviving one of the most extraordinary journeys imaginable. If that happened, history might never have recorded her again. Not because her story wasn't remarkable, but because from that point forward, she simply became another member of the community. There's another historical parallel that kept coming back to my mind as I was researching this story and looking for this woman. In 1937, Amelia Earhart disappeared over the Pacific Ocean. Unlike the woman of the Utsuro-bune, Earhart vanished during the 20th century, a time of modern ships, organized navies, aircraft, radio communications, newspapers, and international governments capable of coordinating massive search efforts. And yet, despite all those advantages, historians still debate exactly what happened to her. New evidence continues to emerge, but nearly 90 years later, the mystery remains unsolved. If it can be that difficult to trace the fate of one well-known individual in the modern era, how much more difficult would it have been in 1803? A lone woman drifting across the Pacific could have reached another shore without ever entering the historical record in a way we'd recognize today. She may have been welcomed by a fishing village. She may have been imprisoned as a foreigner. She may have died before reaching land. Her boat may have broken apart in a storm or simply drifted out to sea until it was lost forever. Perhaps the most intriguing possibility, though, is that maybe we've been looking at the investigation backwards. Instead of asking where she went, maybe we should also be asking who was looking for her. If she was a noblewoman, an exile, a political prisoner, the daughter of an influential family, or someone fleeing danger, then perhaps the better evidence isn't waiting at the end of her journey. Perhaps it's waiting at the beginning. Somewhere there may have been records describing a missing woman, a failed search, diplomatic correspondence, a family desperately trying to discover what became of someone who simply disappeared. Whether those records still exist, if there were records at all, is another question entirely, and that may be the greatest obstacle facing anyone who tries to solve this mystery. History is fragile, documents burn, villages disappear, languages evolve, stories become folklore. Sometimes the only thing that survives is the question itself. Maybe that's why the legend of the Utsuro-bune continues to capture our imagination more than 200 years later, not because it provides extraordinary answers, but because it refuses to stop asking extraordinary questions. Who was this young woman? Where did she come from? What was inside the small box? Was she truly alone during her journey? Why was she set adrift in the first place? And perhaps the question I found myself asking more than any other, after the villagers watched her disappear beyond the horizon, where did she go? We'll probably never know. But sometimes the most fascinating mysteries aren't the ones we solve, they're the ones that continue inviting us to wonder. And in that sense, the story of the Utsuro-bune may still be drifting. So now it is your turn. Tell me in the comments, what do you think happened to the Utsuro-bune and the woman inside? Please like and subscribe if this video was of interest. My channel is still drifting to shore on YouTube, and I'm looking forward to growing it with you. And remember, the possibilities are endless.